Welcome to the She Wins podcast. I'm your host, Heather Sumlin, and today I'm interviewing Kerry Damiano. Kerry has been involved in pageantry for over 40 years. She's an entrepreneur. She's a world traveler. She is Ms. World Traveler, in fact, where she travels across the globe with her niece right now, and they film it and they post it on YouTube. It's precious. You have got to follow. But I talked to her a little bit about her travels, her advice for women, especially those who have never been married, never had kids. How do they tackle life alone without being lonely? Well, Kerry, it's so great to have you here today.
Great to be here. Nice to meet you.
I am fascinated. You were recommended by Maureen, and she Facebook messaged me. She said, "I have the perfect person for you, Ms. World Traveler." And I was like, that is fascinating, and I have to know all about it and all about you. So before we really jump into too much, how about you give us an intro? Tell us a little bit about you.
Sure. Well, I'm single, never married, 62 years old. So I've lasted a long time being single. And because I wasn't spending time, raising kids and taking them to soccer practice and all of that, I ended up just traveling the world. And so that's kind of where the Ms. World Traveler came from. And it's something that I love to do. And I like to encourage other women to do it as well.
Where's your favorite place you've been to?
Ooh, I get asked that a lot, and I have different favorites for different reasons. So, for example, friendliness of the people, I would say my favorite is Australia and New Zealand. For shock value, just the heat was shocking, the lack of sanitation was shocking. Everything was shocking, was in Egypt.
Mm. Tell me, do you have a defining moment? And you probably have more than one.
Well, I do, but as I was kind of thinking about that, I think when I left my, cushy job, the one that had, health insurance and a regular paycheck and, all of those wonderful things, and started my own business in 2000, that really set me on a course of doing my own thing and discovering who I am and what my passions are. And so I feel like that was like a turning point in my life. It's also at the same time when I started memorizing scripture. And that changed my walk with the Lord too. So kind of a couple things happened there at once in 2000. And, I couldn't go back. Now that I've had my own business, it would be, it would be impossible for me to, go back to the safety net.
So tell me a little bit about your business. What do you do?
Well, I have a number of different facets, and over the years, I've tried a number of different things, all things that I love to do and I'm passionate about, and most all of them centered around fashion, beauty, style, young women, all sort of women's interest kinds of things. But mostly, I have been in pageantry, been doing that for over 40 years. And so I do judging and consulting, speaking, but all sort of run the whole gamut. So that's a lot of what I've done. And then there's facets within that. So I do a lot of wardrobe consulting, teaching women about color, just how to present themselves, public speaking, that sort of thing.
When I noticed you are a professional speaker, so you speak all over the place. What do you like to speak on?
Women's interest.
Mhm.
Again, I love to talk about color and style and that sort of thing. But I also like to speak on Christian topics. I memorize scripture, and so I have this ministry called The Amazing Word, and I talk about the importance of memorizing. So it runs a whole gamut, but I would say things that women would be interested in.
So you've memorized over 20 books of the Bible. How did you get started? And what's your advice to someone who's wanting to memorize, whether it's scripture, chapters, full books? What's your advice?
Sure. Sure. Well, let me start with how I got started. So I'm going to go way back to my childhood. I was in one of those youth groups. I think it was called Jet Cadets. I don't even know that that's around anymore, but it's like Awana or, some of the little clubs that they have. And they had this program for if you memorized verses, you could get a sash with medals on it. And yeah, I'm wearing a sash right now. So obviously it's been in my heart for many years to wear a sash because I wanted that thing and I wanted all the medals. And so I just memorized like crazy. When they saw that I was, was pretty good at it, they said, no, you need to slow down. We don't want this to be over before it's even started. And I stopped. That kind of took all the wind out of my sails. And so I didn't come back to it until 2000. And that was an interesting story, too. I was sitting there reading my Bible. I was reading in John because I was doing a Bible study at my church, women's Bible study on John. And I got to the end of the first chapter and I realized I was memorizing it. It was almost like a physical mantle came over me and just gave me this gift for memorizing. And so that's when I re-energized and got going again, and then became quite serious about doing full books.
Awesome. Which was the hardest for you to memorize?
Ooh. Well, I have started Revelation and couldn't finish it. It's just like, it was a lot. And I was trying to do it very fast. So that one is quite difficult. But I would say in general, the ones that are most difficult are the ones that are not stories, that are like heavy on doctrine. So like Ephesians, things where there's so much heavy theology and doctrine in it that it's not a flow of a story. Like the book of Ruth or the book of Esther, those are stories and they flow. And so it's almost easy to remember what's happening. So the ones that it's jump, 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 those are hard to, put in order.
So you mentioned that starting your business in 2000 and starting to memorize scripture was like a defining moment in your life. What happened? Do you think that was different? How did that transform you or help you in your life?
Well, it's spending so much time repeating the word, meditating on it, letting it soak into just my heart, my mind, my cells. And then that made my walk with the Lord closer because I was spending so much time to memorize. It's all about repetition. There is no shortcut. And when someone says, well, you do it, it's easy for you. It's not easy for me. I have to work at it just like everyone else. I just have a gift for presenting it. That's the difference. So I work at it. I don't do it necessarily every day anymore unless I'm working on a particular project, but it's over and over and over. And that's how the word seeps in and truly transforms you.
I love that. I think anything that's worth really understanding and receiving is worth meditating on, spending time with, and focusing on. And I love that you've memorized so much of the Bible. I think that's fascinating. Tell me a little bit about, was there ever any advice that you've received? And it could be something you've read, or it could be something that someone told you that made a tremendous difference in your life.
Well, a man I looked up to and respected greatly was my dad. He passed coming up close to 10 years now, but he was quite a businessman. And so a lot of who I am as an entrepreneur came from watching him, learning from him, listening to him, just kind of give me some direction. And I remember one of the things that he said, I was, had the glums. I was a little bit blue about not being as financially successful as I wanted to be. And I remember him saying, why are you measuring success by the money, by numbers? And that just like totally hit me in the face. Like, okay, that shouldn't be my measure. My measure should be when God says, well done, good and faithful servant, not by how much money is being made. And that just, again, was another defining moment when I could just let go of what the world sees as being successful and focus on what God views as being successful. And, that's a piece of advice for anyone wanting to start their own business, that if you're going to do it for the money, you're never going to find fulfillment in that. You have to do it because God's laid it on your heart, and you do it for his glory and all to his name, and everything else comes after that.
I feel like if you're doing it for the money, there's always more money to be made. You never reach contentment.
Right. Right. Well, and it's strong motivator, right? It's there's a satisfaction in it.
Tell me about your pageant experience. How did you get started? I know you said 40 years or more of pageant experience. What was the starting point for you?
Yes. Well, it was a calling. I was in college, which these days that's considered kind of late to get started. But I was in college and I was very into my studies, my academics, and I was very athletic. And so, I felt this call of God saying, "This is what I want you to do." And I'm just like, are you sure? Doesn't really sound like me. And so, I went back and forth with the Lord a little bit. And finally I said, okay, well, send me someone who knows something about this because I don't even know where to start. And keep in mind, this was the 80s. So there was no Googling,
Right.
Who to call. There was the yellow pages. Maybe somebody out there is old enough to know what the yellow pages are.
Yes.
But I just really didn't know where to go and how to ask and who to talk to. So I was sitting in a Fellowship of Christian Athletes meeting at my school, my college, and this woman came in. And to this day, I don't know what she was doing there. She had a pageant connection. And so God made this connection between us, and she helped me get started. And excuse me. So that was the beginning in 1981. And I got addicted, and I stuck with it.
So what was the first pageant you did?
Well, let's see. What was the first one I did? I did 3 really small ones kind of right in a row, and they were locals for the Miss Arizona America.
Oh.
So it had a talent. I played piano. So the point really of that story is it was a calling for me and something that I felt God was leading me into, as a ministry. And that's, I think, why I stayed in it, because I didn't do it for a crown. I did it for eternal crown.
So so you did the America system.
Yes, I started there, and then I switched over to USA.
And then which titles have you held? And you probably can't name all of them, but what are some?
I have very few. I ended up being Miss Idaho USA it was my 8th. Was it my 8th pageant? Can't remember. But I did several others and did well. I was first runner up a number of times, and enough. Kind of like when you just get that encouragement and you say, okay, it's going well. I need to try some more. And, it's just kept at it. And as one of the things I talk to my girls about is that just because you didn't win this time, that isn't the reason to stop unless you feel like you're done. But to continue to work, it's the talisman out there, right? That dangles in front of you that helps you. It's the motivator to continue to improve.
So you've continued on throughout all the years, and now you're consulting, you're doing judging. What do you feel like is the thing that girls struggle with the most in preparation for pageant that you're able to help them with?
Their mental preparation. I think it's pretty easy to do all of the physical types of things, the working out, the practicing your interview questions, the walking, standing in front of the mirror, learning your posing, and all of those kinds of things. But when it comes to really having the mindset, that's where a lot of girls, don't spend enough time. And to me, this is important because it's the thing that you're left with afterwards, and that asking why. And if you can't answer the why afterwards, you shouldn't be asking the question. And 2, you probably shouldn't have entered the pageant to begin with, because there is no answer to it. Right? I still have girls struggling with this. That's why not me? Or why her? That will go on and on and on and on in your head and get you down if you let it. So you have to understand when you go in that there's a 98% chance you're not going to win. That's a big percentage. And if you don't understand that and are willing to accept that this time you weren't in the top 2%, then try something else. Try something that if you cross the finish line first, you win.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Cut and dry.
I think it's interesting. So I do a lot of, I do pageant. I don't want to say pageant coaching. I do interview coaching and I do mental prep. So my father's an Olympic champion and I teach his mental management system. So I teach girls how to control their mind under pressure. And so I love what you're saying. And one of the things that gets me all the time about pageant is it's the only sport where more than one person has done enough to win, but only one's recognized. And there's more than one deserving. And that's one thing that
Yes.
people can't grab. And it's hard for them to understand is that you may have done everything you could possibly do. That doesn't mean that the judges are going to agree with you being the victor at
Right.
the end.
Right.
And so that's a very important thing for them to be able to wrap their mind around is it may not be
Yes.
me today, and that's okay. God can bless someone other than me, and that's okay.
That's right. Well, and we say this all the time in pageantry that if one aspect were different, the outcome could have been completely different. So I'll give you an example. This was a few years ago. I was judging, and there were two girls that in my mind were absolutely even. And I couldn't decide. I mean, I lost sleep over trying to decide between those two girls. One was wearing a red dress, one was a white dress. And so I sat and sat and sat, and I just finally went, okay, your red dress, white dress. That was my order. And afterwards, I went to talk to the auditor, who really wasn't supposed to tell me results, but I accidentally saw them as he was shuffling some papers around. And I saw two judges had red dress, white dress, like I did. Two judges had white dress, red dress. And one judge had red dress at the top, white dress at the bottom. One judge determined the outcome of that pageant because the others were all canceled out. So when you say one aspect, if one judge were different, that could have had a completely different finish. So that's an example that you'll never wrap your mind around that unless you go in prepared to say, it might be my turn and it might not be. And that's okay.
I think the reason to enter shouldn't be because you solely want to win. It has to be the journey. It has to be the self-discovery.
Right.
So
Yes.
what was it for you? Was it the advocacy? Was it the personal development? What was it that kept you coming back?
It was the calling. I felt like God had that for me to do. And at the time, I really didn't understand the full breadth of what that meant. At the time, I had many speaking opportunities to give my testimony and to help other young women. But really, as I look back now over the last 40 years, I see what God was doing in calling me to be a minister to young women. I fully believe that the older women were to teach the younger women, as it says in Titus 2. And it actually says they're to teach them to love their husbands and to love their children. I'm not married and I have no children. That doesn't mean I don't have something to teach. And so I still take that quite seriously, that the years of what I have done and my expertise, I try to pass that on to young women. So what God was doing 40 years ago was setting me up to have these experiences so that I could sow back in to others.
Talk a little bit about traveling. Do you travel alone or do you go with girlfriends? Do you go with family? What do you do?
When I first started travel, I was pretty young and couldn't afford to do much. So I traveled with my mom and we traveled about 10 years together. And then I got a little more set in my ways. And for the next 30 years, I traveled by myself, which I still do. But for Ms. World Traveler, I travel with my niece. Even we're kind of separate. We're doing separate jobs, but we are going to the same place at the same time to do the filming. So I had a little boat. And I would say that I loved traveling by myself. There was something about trying to figure things out and, just challenging myself to overcome fear and just go do it instead of saying, oh, I wish I could, or I'd like to do that, but I don't have someone to go with, just go do it. And there's something very liberating about that.
So what would your advice be to someone who, wow, that sounds great, but I always go with someone. I don't want to go by myself. Are there any tips or things that you would do that would get you geared up to tackle a trip?
Mhm. Well, that was several different questions all in one. So let me start by just about the encouragement to other women. Part of what our mission is at Ms. World Traveler is to inspire women to travel, even if you have to go on your own. And so I think there's some fear with that,
Mhm.
that we as women have to get over our fear of doing things by ourselves. And there's always, a fear about, I really can't afford it. Is it safe? So these are things that I hear women talking about that keep them from traveling. So I try and say, pinpoint what the thing is that stops you from wanting to go, and then figure out how to fix that thing. So your question had to do about those who don't want to do it by themselves. And I think there's a way that you can do that. Like, for example, join tours. You can
Mhm.
go by yourself, but join tours and then you're around people or meet someone there. Somebody comes there and you meet someplace. You can truly be with people as much as you want to. If you're personable, strike up a conversation with the person on the plane going to the same place. Maybe they want to meet somebody for dinner, or whatever. So I think there's plenty of ways to do that. It shouldn't be a thing that's you.
Where was a place that you went alone and then you met people? Was there a place where you're like, wow, I met some amazing friends by traveling alone?
Uh-huh. Well, this was kind of a fun thing that happened. This was in China, and it was before cell phones were good enough to be overseas. So it was kind of in the early days. And I met this young woman who was traveling for work, and we determined that we were both going to be in this little small town like 4 or 5 days later. The same time. And so we said, let's meet for dinner. And so she went off and did her thing, and I went off and did my thing. And then it was time to be in that little town, and I truly had no idea if we were going to make the connection or not because we had no way to get in touch with each other. But we did. We found each other. We went out that evening and just had an absolutely wonderful time, like we'd been friends forever. And we don't stay in touch anymore. It was just sort of a one and done, but had a great connection in a place where we both felt a little bit like there's nobody here that I can talk to. So it was just a wonderful moment in time.
Has there ever been a time when you've had to create a solution to a problem that was helpful to you?
Hmm. Wow, that is a good question. I think I put out fires virtually every day. So right now, I'm going through an IRS audit. So this little interview was a really nice break because I've been making copies and running numbers, all morning. And so as I've been thinking about that, and there's no solution per se, but there's a lot of organizing your thoughts. How am I going to approach this? How am I going to give them the information that they want in an organized manner based on what they said they want, which is different than I organized it. So
Mm-hmm.
that has been, this morning before I was supposed to get up, before my alarm went off, I started thinking, okay, how do I put all that together? How do I organize that? So coming up with solutions in my head by just running different scenarios, different strategies. And, if I figure it out, I will write a book and make $1 trillion because anyone going through this, it's a very stressful situation.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot to process.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think I think taxes are so complicated. So complicated. So everyone will agree with that. One of the things I
Yeah.
ask everybody, and so I want to hear your definition. How do you define winning?
I'm going to define it biblically
Mm-hmm.
when God says, well done, good and faithful servant. Because this really applies to pageantry too, that you can still win and not have gotten the crown. So, for example, back in 1986, Holly Berry did not win Miss USA. She was first runner up, but everybody knows who Halle Berry is. Nobody knows who, well, I know, but most people do not know who actually was the girl that won. So the point is that that was a springboard for her. She didn't get the crown, but she got something amazing from it. a connection, a network, whatever it is that put her thrust her forward into the spotlight, and she's had an amazing career. So that's just an example of, just because you didn't actually get the prize doesn't mean that you weren't a winner. The other thing I like to think is that your competition's against yourself. If you go in thinking you're competing against other people, you get down on yourself. But if you're thinking your competition is against yourself, am I better today than I was yesterday? Did I work hard today and improve myself from who I was before? And that's a continual process that we can be on. And that to me is also, you've won. If you have done something today, pushed yourself beyond your comfort zone, or, learned a new skill, or did something that you overcame fear, did something you hadn't done before, you've won.
So what's
What
next?
do you think?
Oh, I think winning is doing the best you can with what you've got. And I think I absolutely
Much more succinct.
but I absolutely agree with you. I think it's when it's comparing yourself to someone else is never going to actually get you anywhere unless you're comparing yourself to someone who is where you want to go and you're applying the lessons in which they're using for their own journey and learning from them and becoming better. But when you're comparing yourself to somebody and lessening you, that's never going to get you anywhere.
Right. It's a source of discontent, isn't it?
Absolutely. I had a client once tell me that comparison is the bullet train to discontent.
I like that.
I was like, that's really good. Oh gosh, I had a thought bubble and then it ran away. It popped. Has that ever happened to you?
That happens.
Happens to me. Happens to me. I was writing down, I'm writing notes as we go because afterwards I'll do an aha episode on my aha moments from the things that you said, which is really fun. And what's next for you? What do you have coming up on the horizon?
Well, we just got back a couple days ago from South America. We were filming in Buenos Aires and Rio. And so we're really going full board with Ms. World Traveler. And I have some goals of where I want it to be. We're still fairly new. We're a year and a half in. And so we haven't grown in terms of followers and views at the pace I would have liked to. But, God has a purpose in that. And so I'm just resting in the fact that, God has said, I'm going to take you at the pace of which you can handle. And so there's peace, in that letting God be the driver of those things. But I still have goals and still working toward wanting to get to a level where of views and followers to where we can develop partnerships, sponsorships, some things like that, maybe some merchandise. So, there's a few things on the horizon. But fortunately, I'm loving it. I'm having the time of my life. At 62 years old, I started a new business, and just, passion gets me up and energizes me every morning. And it's a very exciting time.
Tell me, how can people follow you? Where can they find you?
Okay, sure. Well, we have a YouTube channel, which is our web series, and that's Ms. World Traveler, Ms. World Traveler. And you can also follow us on Instagram, which is Kerry, 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 Ms. World Traveler. So those are places if, you'd like to follow the adventures. We have a lot of fun and we go exciting places. So yes, come along.
I think that sounds great. Everybody follow Kerry, Ms. World Traveler, on YouTube and also on Instagram. Thank you so much for your time and sharing with us. Like this if you do, share it with a friend. If you're not a Patreon member, please join the Patreon membership because I'm going to pick Kerry's brain and we're going to post a pageant specific Patreon episode and a women specific Patreon episode. I can't wait to see what she has to say.